chose when you decided to incarnate, what you froze into your pattern that allows you to experience the unfoldment of your life path. So those that are sensitive enough to use that permission slip to read it are simply telling you what the reflection of your birth time astrologically reflects to what you chose prior to incarnation to experience. So it depends on the sensitivity of the reader to read accurately the ideas that are frozen in that matrix that are representative of what you chose to freeze as your life path and can be read by many different people in many different ways with many different permission slips. So again, remember, nothing controls you except that it defines the hallway you chose to walk down, the life path, and the challenges you chose to experience. So sensitive people can read that to an extent, but you still have free will within that in terms of how you might walk down that hallway that you chose with your free will from spirit to walk down in this life. So it's a reflection. It's not a control. It's a defining guideline to the idea of your path in this life as a reflection of it.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Yes.
And how can this person wants to know how they can know if they have hybrid children without you telling them specifically?
Sometimes many people will have dreams of interacting with children that seem a little bit different than human children. So sometimes that's one way you can tell. Now, almost anyone who's interacting with us is in some way, shape, or form part of the hybridization program, whether they actually have genetics in the hybrid children or not. So being a part of the hybridization program doesn't necessarily always mean you actually have hybrid children. But it may be that your energy is being used, your template is being used to help grow the hybrid children, or you're teaching them things about living on Earth that they need to know when they eventually come to live among you on Earth in the years to come. But the idea is that a lot of individuals have hybrid children, or their genetics have been used in the creation of the hybrid children, or their energy patterns have been used in the creation of the hybrid children, like a template in a sense. So it doesn't really matter whether you literally have genetics in the hybrid children. Usually you're still involved if you have found ways to talk to us at all. It's very rare that people who find us and speak with us or ask us a question aren't in some way a part of the hybridization program, whether they have children or not.
And in determining how many children somebody has, are there certain percentages that help identify that idea?
Well, again, in some ways, colloquially, you can consider a hybrid child to be, quote unquote, your child if they contain at least 15 to 20% of your DNA. And that usually means there's about maybe 15, 17, maybe up to 23 or 25 hybrid children that might have that much of your DNA in them. But DNA is spread among hundreds, if not thousands, of hybrid children. So are they yours if they have even 1% of your DNA? That's up to you to decide. They might have connections with you in other ways for different purposes, depending upon their life path, that would supersede the idea of how much genetics they actually contain anyway. They might be part of your soul family. They might have a life path that needs to connect strongly to you, even if they have very little of your genetics within their makeup. So it just depends on several factors as to how closely bonded you might be with a hybrid child. It's not always about the amount of genetics within them that came from you.
And back in 2020, you mentioned the importance of that election and how the result catapulted us to a more positive timeline. With the upcoming election in the fall of 2024, do you perceive the results affecting open contact? I understand your civilization will not talk about our politics. I just want to clarify if the election will affect how and when we meet our ET family.
All right. Now we are allowed to say this about that. Understand we have for some time been talking about the idea of the splitting realities, the splitting prism. For the sake of simplicity, for now, let us take what many of you might call the Dolores Cannon approach and say that instead of thinking about it as an infinite number of parallel reality Earths, you can, shall we say, render it down to the idea of two, the new Earth, the old Earth, that are splitting apart, going in different directions. And the people that shift with them, then going in those different directions. You could say going in the new direction, shifting to the new Earth, going in the old direction, remaining on the old Earth, so to speak. But it's still a shift. So the idea is, look at what's happening in the splits that you are experiencing now in your politics. Specifically, look at the idea of people saying, this person won, no, this person won. Which is true? Both are true, because they're both reflective of two completely different Earths. That's how you're starting to see the split. Right now, of course, you're sharing a reality. You're creating a reality that seems like a shared reality. And therefore, you can still see each other saying, no, it's this way, no, it's that way. Eventually, you will not see each other. You will not experience each other. But right now, that should be your first clue. The degree to which each side, each group is saying, no, 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 this is the winner. No, 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 this is the winner, should be your first clue that you're actually experiencing the beginnings of the splitting into different realities. So, those that are moving in the direction of what, again, euphemistically we will refer to as the new Earth, will experience one thing. Those that are shifting in the direction of continuing with the old Earth will eventually experience something else, even to the point, eventually, literally, of there being two White Houses in your country, two government bodies in each place on your planet, where one person wins this one and one person wins that one. So you have to start understanding this is different realities that you're actually beginning to experience. Even though it may seem to be very chaotic right now and everyone arguing about what is real, they're both real. But it's just the very beginnings of the splittings into those very different and very real realities that will become farther and farther and farther apart. And the people going in those different directions experiencing very, very different Earths eventually. So, allow yourself to simply stay in the vibration that you prefer, and you will continue to navigate and continue to shift and continue to experience the result of that, one of which will lead to open contact and one of which may not. Now again, anything in between does exist, for there are multiple variations and versions of parallel reality Earths. But again, for simplicity, just to use the extreme examples now to illustrate the point, one will experience the idea of open contact because that means it's about connection and expansion, love, connection, kindness. And the other, based in fear, negativity, will experience something quite different. I'm not going to describe that right now. But they will not experience open contact in the way we've been describing and in the way we will participate in it with you. That is the answer to the question. That is all we are allowed to say. So think about that and understand what you're seeing as the beginnings of that split on your planet.
Okay, and this person is saying, if I have a worry about the coming election and how it's going to turn out,
I have
etc.
said what we need to say about this subject,
Okay.
this is the end of the conversation.
About that.
Because that's
Okay.
the most important thing to leave all of you with, is the understanding of what you're seeing, why you're seeing it, and what's actually happening. You are literally seeing the beginnings of the splitting into different realities, where each side really truly sees that their outcome is the real outcome. That's why you're seeing what appears to be a dichotomy. And that is sufficient unto this day.
Okay.
So,
Can you tell us a little bit about why there is such a focus on gender identity and transgender going on right now?
because spirit is everything and nothing, and it is a way of illustrating that spirit can be anything. And it is the idea of opening up humanity to the understanding of your true existence as a spirit that contains any variation and every variation beyond even what you're experiencing on your planet. But it's a symbol to stop limiting yourself and defining yourself and boxing yourself in to a very rigid understanding of what it means to be a human. Because what it means to be a human is also what it means to be a spirit that is expansive and inclusive instead of exclusive.
And you have said things in our artistic media are representative of changes in our collective consciousness.
Yes.
There have been a recent reemergence and fascination with dragons, the most recent manifestation being a show called The House of the Dragon. Why is this?
Again, dragons are a symbolic projection of extra-dimensional beings that's connecting you to an ancient source of knowledge and wisdom that you are now reclaiming, regaining. Dragons don't look that way in their own reality as the interdimensional beings that they are, but that's how they are experienced and perceived in your physical linear space-time reality, because they are so powerful, so big. It's the idea of the serpent that contains knowledge, but magnified 1,000 times. It's presenting itself as the collective, as the archetypal representation of the power and access you have to ancient knowledge and ancient wisdom that you can reclaim in your present life. It's the idea that gets you fired up, that allows you to follow your passions and act on them fully, to follow the path of the dragon without fear, to reclaim your true soul's power. That's the symbol that it represents. Remember, it's connected also to your DNA. So it also represents higher connections to energetic forms that in non-physical template level realities have to do with the way DNA is formed in physical reality. And it is the idea of allowing yourself to begin to build a third strand of DNA and open up all the dormant markers within you that you now consider to be junk DNA that you think doesn't do anything. But it does, and it will, as you open up all these markers. The third strand will build within humanity as you evolve. Many people have thought 12 strands will exist, but that is not possible for you physically and remaining as a human. There are beings throughout the galaxy, throughout the universe, that have more strands of DNA than you do. But humanity will evolve a third strand, eventually, as you become the sixth hybrid race. But the idea of connecting to 12 strands is something you connect to energetically in the spirit realm, in the template realm. It doesn't physicalize. That's something that goes beyond the human being. But it is something that you can connect to energetically as a spirit.
Thank you. This question is about Skinwalker Ranch.
Yes.
What is buried inside the mesa on Skinwalker Ranch?
It is an ancient alien craft that crashed on your planet and has been buried over time by erosion and the natural evolution of your planet. They will eventually discover this. Give them a couple of years.
What causes the GPS anomalies and interrupted laser beams during the scientists' experiments?
A combination of the vibrations that are still active within the ship and also the portals that exist in the area that can cause many disruptions in electronic equipment and so on and so forth. They are getting closer to understanding that the portals truly exist there. They are creating demonstrations and evidence of their existence. But sometimes it's a combination of the vibrations that are emanating from the crashed ship itself, because some of the systems in the ship are still very active. They last a long, long time. They never go out. They can last millions and millions of years. So sometimes it's an interference pattern, a combination of what's being emanated from the crashed ship and also the vibrations that are coming from the portals as ships move through them, which can create a cascade effect of different kinds of energies and vibrational frequencies to radiate from the portals as well as various ships move through them. So they'll discover all this. Give them some more time.
What group of aliens is the ship representative of?
We are not allowed to talk about the ancient ones yet.
Okay. And is that why they're having trouble drilling in through the ground there?
Well, yes, they keep running into the debris from the crashed ship that does not allow their devices to drill through them. The substance that the ships are made out of is too hard.
Can you explain briefly the evolution of humanity in a way that a 7-year-old would understand? This person's son has been asking him this question, or her, and I don't know how to explain it because I'm confused myself.
Well, it's sort of like being in school and graduating from one level to another, going from first grade to second grade to third grade to fourth grade. You learn new things. You grow in your understanding. You learn new lessons, and it gives you more experience and more ability to do more things. So the evolution of humanity is like that. Earth is like a school, and humanity can graduate from one level to another depending upon the kind of experiences that you face as challenges and how you learn to transform them or overcome them. So a school structure is a good analogy for a child to understand. Humanity is evolving by learning more every time they graduate to a new level of class, to a new grade, so to speak. Hopefully that will help you.
Okay, and this question, why has our true history been hidden? This person is referring to the fact that we were created by the Anunnaki. I assume it has to do with politics and power, but I just don't really understand what's going on. Why do we choose to forget or deny where we came from? Why is the ET story so taboo in the mainstream?
All right, well, you're actually asking two different questions. One about the idea of the contemporary modern situation of suppression of information, of whatever information may be known, for the retention of power and so on and so forth. But you're asking, why have you forgotten about the idea of the Anunnaki? Well, there aren't many records left that exist because of disasters on your planet. A lot of civilizations and a lot of records of ancient times have been wiped out by volcanic action, by earthquakes, by meteoric impact. Many civilizations have simply been wiped off the face of the earth in that way, and the records that talked about all these things along with them. So some of the forgetfulness is simply because there's nothing to be found anymore, or some things are very difficult for you to find or take a long time for you to realize and remember in a variety of different ways, because the destruction in the past has been so complete. So because of the natural forgetfulness that goes with the earth cycles, of forgetting who you are so that you can live your life spontaneously and discover who you are again from a new point of view, That natural forgetfulness that goes along with incarnating on the earth plane then also doesn't necessarily give you much ability all the time to remember that these ancient civilizations existed or that these ancient things happened, because there's really not much left of the records of these things. Now, again, some of them exist here and there, and some of them can still be found. But a lot of what you're remembering is coming through the idea of new souls bringing the information with them when they incarnate on your planet, and intuitively simply knowing that these things happen, and the intuition leading them to where sometimes they can find some of the ancient records that do still survive. Plus the idea of out-of-body travel and a tapping into the Akashic records, which contains all the information, because again, no information is really lost. It's all woven into the structure and the fabric of space-time and existence itself, and can always be tapped into, and sometimes the information you have is being retrieved that way. But physically speaking, there isn't a lot of information that survives when something like a meteor slams into your planet and destroys a culture. So it's all of that.
Okay, thank you. Can you share with us a little bit about the moon and its relationship to Earth and any entities that inhabit it?
The moon is a natural body that was split off from the Earth due to an actual impact in the early solar system of another body that struck the Earth, and material broke off and became the moon. So it's a natural body in that sense. However, the natural body has been engineered by extraterrestrials in a variety of ways, placed into its present orbit, and there are many extraterrestrial bases that exist on the moon, if that's what you're referring to as inhabitants. There are no natural inhabitants in that sense on the moon. But there are many ET bases and underground bases that are inhabited by extraterrestrials who come and go for a variety of reasons. So, the idea is that energetically in its orbit, the moon balances the Earth in a variety of ways, represents certain vibrational frequencies and energies that have to do with feminine energy and the balancing of feminine energy. Some time ago, we talked about the idea that the Earth would capture an asteroid and it would be somewhat representative of the male energy, and that you would have two moons. Well, if you actually look it up, you will realize that that has actually now happened. There is an asteroid that is in orbit around the Earth, in a sense, as a second very small moon. And that represents the idea now of coming into the balance between masculine and feminine energy, of getting into the idea of the balance of your emotionality and your logic systems. So, look it up, you will see that there is already a second moon around the Earth in the form of a small asteroid.
Okay. And can you please provide insider ways that we can have better discernment? This person is saying, I often find myself contemplating if the messages are coming from my higher self or the ego. Sometimes it's very obvious, but other times I feel like I'm doing the right thing, but in hindsight, it turned out to be a negative belief.
All right, but you can learn from that. Again, the idea is your willingness to learn from recognizing that you may have gone in a direction you didn't prefer is what allows you to gain more ability to recognize the difference between that energy and the one you do prefer. Following the formula helps, because acting on your passion raises your frequency and makes you a more sensitive antenna, a more sensitive receiver to higher frequency energy, so that when you get used to perceiving those energies, you can more easily tell the difference between energies that are you and energies that are not. But the willingness to learn from whatever path you went down that wasn't what you prefer is also what will increase your ability to tell the difference between that energy and the energy of the path you do prefer. So if your willingness is there to learn from that, to recognize the difference, you'll get better at it. Stop worrying about it, and you will become more sensitive to what the difference in those things are. The more you worry about it, the less sensitive you will be. because you're increasing the idea of the negative path, of the negative energy, and becoming more sensitive to that. So, but only in the sense that you keep doing that. So you have to not worry about it, just stay in a positive state, which is one of the steps in the formula, and learn a lesson from it, and you'll be able to eventually tell the difference. Don't worry about it. Lighten up on yourself. Don't take it so seriously.
And this question is about the formula. This person wants to know if someone hasn't been following the formula for a while or has gotten themselves into misalignment, is the formula able to guide them out of that and get them back on the right track, so to speak? Or is there something else they need to do in that situation before the formula can work properly?
Well, they have to be willing to allow themselves to use the formula as fully as they possibly can. The formula is self-expanding, self-guiding, self-correcting. So the idea is all they have to do is go back to understanding as precisely as possible, as clearly as possible, what each step of the formula actually means, so they can know that they are doing it as fully as possible, as purely as possible, as clearly as possible. And then, yes, it will guide you back through synchronicity, because that's part of the effects of the formula, is that synchronicity becomes the guiding, organizing principle. So yes, the short answer is yes, it's self-correcting and self-guiding when you understand what each component actually means and use it precisely.
Okay, thank you. And we just have a few moments left. Is there anything else you would like to share about the topic tonight and other information?
Again, the concept of the Interstellar Alliance Volunteer Corps has a lot to do with stretching humanity, stretching your assumptions, getting you out of your routines, giving you an opportunity to explore whether you might actually be overlooking something that could really be one of your passions. It just gives you an opportunity to extend beyond your normal routine. Just take a moment and consider it. Explore it. You may find that you will actually enjoy it far more than you think. If you're already doing a lot of volunteer work, then fine. But it's up to you to determine what else you might be able to do. And please do remember, it's a whole package. So working on yourself, that's wonderful. Using your energy to send out vibrations of love and kindness and peace, absolutely fine. Beautiful. But the actions you take in addition to all that also are part of the whole package. You cannot leave anything out if you're going to function as a holistic being. So do it all. You can do it all. And therefore, you will go together and go forward as a whole. Take advantage of your connection to the whole so that it can serve all of the parts that you are. Our unconditional love to you all. And now, allow yourselves in a relaxed state to move forward for the remainder of the transmission.